The document that would detonate a $4.8 billion corporate merger wasn't signed in a boardroom. It was written on a laptop in a cramped economy seat by a woman who just an hour before had been sitting in first class. She was Dr. Kenna Sterling, the brilliant black attorney hired to finalize the deal. But the men she was flying to meet didn't know that. They just saw a woman they thought didn't belong. They had her humiliated and removed from her seat. They didn't realize they weren't just disrespecting a passenger. They were sabotaging their own empire. This is the story of how one act of prejudice didn't just backfire, it triggered a corporate cataclysm. The air in the first-class cabin of Transatlantic Air Flight 101 from JFK to Heathrow was a carefully curated fiction. It smelled of quiet wealth, a blend of expensive perfume, warm towels, and the faint, sterile scent of recycled air, trying its best to be prestigious. Dr. Kenna Sterling inhaled it, a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. This was more than a flight. It was a victory lap before the final sprint. At 34, Kenna was a senior associate at Whitaker Chen & Associates, one of New York's most respected law firms. The doctor before her name wasn't for show. It was from a doctorate in jurisprudence from Yale, a testament to a mind that moved through the labyrinthine corridors of corporate law like a predator. Her specialty was mergers and acquisitions, with a razor-sharp focus on intellectual property, the digital crown jewels of the 21st century. She settled into seat 2B, a plush beige leather throne that was more of a personal pod than a simple seat. She neatly placed her leather briefcase containing the final drafts of the Synth AI acquisition under the seat in front of her. The deal was her masterpiece. For 6 months, she had lived and breathed it. Synth AI was a brilliant, nimble artificial intelligence firm in London, founded by a visionary named Gideon Cole. They were being acquired by Omnicorp, a sprawling American tech conglomerate known for absorbing smaller companies and scaling their technology. The deal was worth $4.8 billion. It would make Gideon Cole and his team fabulously wealthy and catapult Omnicorp to the forefront of the AI race. For Kenna, it was the deal that would make her a partner at Whitaker Chen. She had personally untangled the snarled mess of Synth AI's patent portfolio, ensuring every line of code and every algorithm was ironclad. Her name was on every key document. She was the deal's architect. She accepted a glass of champagne from a flight attendant, her mind already in London, running through the agenda for the next day's final signing meeting. She was calm, prepared, and in control. That control began to fray with the arrival of the man for seat 2D. He was in his late 50s with a florid face, a paunch that strained the buttons of his expensive but rumpled suit, and an air of belligerent self-importance. He tossed his carry-on into the overhead bin with a loud thud, grunting as he did so. He glanced across the aisle at Kenna, who gave him a polite, neutral nod. He didn't return it. Instead, his eyes did a slow, deliberate scan from her intricate braids, down her tailored blazer, to her relaxed posture. A sneer flickered at the corner of his mouth. "You know," he said, his voice, a gravelly baritone that carried through the quiet cabin. "They're letting just about anyone up here these days." Kenna's smile didn't falter, but her eyes grew cold. She had dealt with men like this her entire life. The ones who saw her success not as a product of her intellect and hard work, but as a glitch in their ordered world. "First class is a wonderful experience," she replied, her tone even and professional. "I'm glad we both get to enjoy it." She turned back to her tablet, a clear signal that the conversation was over. But he wasn't done. He flagged down a flight attendant passing by. "Excuse me, miss. Brenda. Could you come here a moment?" The flight attendant, A woman named Brenda with a helmet of blonde hair and a strained customer service smile hurried over. "Yes, Mr. Harrington." "Is everything all right? I'm not sure it is." "Robert Bob Harrington," said, gesturing with his chin toward Kenna. "I think this passenger might be in the wrong cabin. Perhaps she's confused." Brenda's eyes flicked to Kenna. The professional smile tightened. An almost imperceptible shift occurred in her posture, a straightening that was less about service and more about authority. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass, please?" Kenna felt a slow burn start in her chest. She had been Ma'am Ed in that tone before. It wasn't a term of respect. It was a tool of diminishment. Still, she maintained her composure. This was a minor annoyance, a gnat to be swatted away. "Of course," she said, pulling up the digital pass on her phone and holding it out. Brenda gave it a cursory glance, barely registering the name or seat number. Her focus was on Harrington, her actual customer in her mind. "Mr. Harrington." "What seems to be the problem," Harrington boomed, leaning into the aisle, "is that I paid a lot of money for my ticket. My company paid a lot of money, and the integrity of the first-class experience is important. There have been issues with people from coach wandering up here. I just want to be sure everything is in order. The dog whistle was so loud it was a foghorn. He wasn't saying it, but everyone in the vicinity heard it. She doesn't look like she belongs here." Kenna's voice dropped a full octave, losing its warmth and gaining a steel edge. "My boarding pass clearly says seat 2B in the first-class cabin. I am not wandering from anywhere. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." Brenda looked from the powerful complaining man to the calm, defiant woman. She made a choice, the path of least resistance, the one that placated the person she instinctively saw as more important. "Ma'am, there might be a duplicate booking issue," Brenda said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It happens sometimes. Let me just check my manifest." She tapped at a handheld device, her brow furrowed in a pantomime of diligence. Kenna knew there was no duplicate booking. This was a performance, and she was the unwilling participant. Other passengers were starting to peer over their seats, their curiosity piqued by the low drama. The humiliation was beginning to curdle in her stomach. "There seems to be some confusion with your ticket," Brenda announced, turning back to Kenna. She avoided eye contact. "It seems this seat is also assigned to another passenger. Mr. Harrington's status with the airline gives him priority. I'm going to have to ask you to move." The lie was so bald, so insulting, that for a moment Kenna was speechless. His status? She was a top-tier frequent flyer herself. "That's unacceptable." Kenna said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I booked this seat months ago. It is my seat. If there is a system error, you need to resolve it." "I am not moving." Harrington scoffed loudly. "Oh, for God's sake, just listen to her. This is what I'm talking about. Always causing a scene." That was it. The breaking point. Kenna stood up, her 5'10" frame commanding the space. She looked directly at Brenda, bypassing the buffoon in 2D. "Your job is to verify the tickets. My ticket is for this seat. His ticket is for that seat. If you are incapable of performing that simple function, I suggest you find someone who can. Perhaps the purser or the captain." Brenda's face flushed with anger. Her authority had been challenged. "Ma'am, I am the senior attendant in this cabin. If you don't cooperate, I'll be forced to call the captain and report a non-compliant passenger. You are delaying the departure of this aircraft." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. A non-compliant passenger. Those were loaded words, words that could get you put on a no-fly list. It was a gross abuse of power, and they both knew it. "Then call him," Kenna said, crossing her arms. "Let's have this conversation with someone in charge." Brenda, cornered and furious, spoke into her internal communicator. A few minutes later, Captain Miller arrived. He was a man who looked perpetually tired, his uniform immaculate, but his eyes weary. He wanted problems to disappear, not to be adjudicated. He listened to Brenda's clipped, biased version of the events, a passenger refusing to cooperate, a potential seating duplication, a belligerent attitude. He listened to Harrington's puffed-up complaints about security and comfort. Then he turned to Kenna. Miss, he began, already using a diminutive term. It's Dr. Kenna, corrected him, her voice like ice. Dr. Sterling. The correction irritated him. Right. Look, we have a plane full of people waiting to get to London. I don't have time to sort out a ticketing squabble. Brenda says there's an issue with the seat. We have another seat for you in the back. I need you to take it so we can get on our way. So your solution to your airline's alleged mistake is to penalize me? Kenna asked, her voice incredulous. You won't even look at my boarding pass. You won't verify my ticket against your own manifest. I'm trusting my crew, Captain Miller said flatly. Are you going to move, or am I going to have you escorted off my aircraft? The final, humiliating threat. Escorted off. In front of all these people. The whispers were louder now. The stares were a physical weight. Kenna looked at the captain's tired, indifferent face. She looked at Brenda's smug, triumphant one. And she looked at Bob Harrington, who was now leaning back in his seat with a supremely satisfied smirk, as if he had just personally won a great victory for civilization. In that moment, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over Kenna. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal in her gut, but it was now being banked and controlled by a formidable intellect. These people saw her as a problem. They would soon learn that she was in fact a solution, just not theirs. She held up her hands in a gesture of surrender that was anything but. Fine, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. There's no need for security. I will move. She methodically reached down, retrieved her briefcase, and took her coat from the hanger. She did not look at Harrington. She did not look at the captain. She held Brenda's gaze for a long moment, a silent promise passing between them, before turning. As she walked down the aisle past the gawking business class passengers into the narrow confines of the economy cabin, it felt like the longest walk of her life. Every eye on her was a judgment, the walk of shame. A flight attendant with an expression of pity showed her to a middle seat in row 38, squeezed between a sleeping student and a man who smelled of onions. She buckled herself in the cramped space, a stark contrast to the luxury she had just left. The humiliation was a physical ache. But as the plane finally pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway, Kenna Sterling didn't stew. She didn't sulk. She opened her laptop, paid the exorbitant fee for the in-flight Wi-Fi, and began to work. The engine's roar as they lifted off the runway was the sound of a starting gun. The game had changed, and she was about to write the new rules. The Wi-Fi on Transatlantic Air Flight 101 was sluggish, a pale imitation of the lightning-fast connection she had in her office, but it was enough. As the plane climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, Kenna Sterling wasn't just a humiliated passenger in seat 38E, she was a command center. She ignored the cramped elbows and the reek of the onion-scented man beside her. She ignored the crying baby 3 rows back. Her world narrowed to the glowing screen of her laptop, her mind a whirlwind of legal statutes, contractual clauses, and a newly ignited ice-cold fury. Her first instinct had been to fire off a furious complaint to the airline, to draft a letter to the FAA, to begin the process of making Captain Miller and Brenda's lives a legal hell. It would be justified. It would be satisfying. But it would be small. It would be about her. And this, she was beginning to realize, was about something much, much bigger. Who was Bob Harrington? He wasn't just some random boorish passenger. His entitlement felt corporate. My company paid a lot of money, he'd said. Curiosity piqued, Kenna did something she probably wouldn't have if she were still sipping champagne in 2B. She began to dig. A quick search of his name combined with keywords like executive and New York brought up a LinkedIn profile. Robert Bob Harrington, Vice President of Synergistic Growth Omnicorp. Kenna froze. Her blood ran cold. Omnicorp, the company that was hours away from acquiring her client, Synth AI, the company whose 9-figure legal fees were about to make her a partner. The pompous, racist man who had instigated her public humiliation was a vice president at the very company she was flying to meet. The sheer, staggering irony of it almost made her laugh. It was a joke written by a malevolent god. They had ejected the architect of their own triumph from the room. Her mind started connecting dots with terrifying speed. Harrington was flying first class to London. Another man he'd been chatting with before takeoff, seated in 3A, also looked like a corporate type. They were almost certainly the advance team, or perhaps part of the main delegation for the final signing. They were her counterparts, a new search Omnicorp corporate culture. The first few results were polished PR pieces, full of buzzwords like innovation, diversity, and integrity. But Kenna knew how to dig deeper. She went past the first 10 pages of search results into the weeds of Glassdoor reviews, anonymous forums for tech employees, and buried news articles about past lawsuits. A pattern emerged. A lawsuit from a female executive 2 years ago, alleging a hostile work environment, settled out of court. Whispers of a boys' club culture in the upper echelons. Anonymous reviews complaining about aggressive cutthroat management and a complete disregard for work-life balance. One post was particularly chilling. At Omnicorp, who you know and who you look like matters more than what you do. If you'd fit the mold, you'd last long. The mold. Kenna knew exactly what that mold looked like. It looked like Bob Harrington. It looked like men who saw a black woman in first class and assumed she was a mistake. This wasn't just about one boorish VP. This was about the soil he grew in. Harrington wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a deep-seated corporate disease. And she was about to legally bind her client, the innovative, progressive, and deeply principled Synth AI, to this diseased behemoth. Gideon Cole, the founder of Synth AI, was a genius programmer in his early 40s. He was also a fiercely loyal and protective leader. His company culture was legendary in the London tech scene, collaborative, inclusive, and brilliant. He had agonized over the decision to sell, but believed Omnicorp's resources were the only way to bring his AI technology to a global scale to truly change the world. He was trusting Kenna, and by extension, her firm, to have vetted not just the financials, but the very soul of the company he was marrying. And she was sitting in a middle seat in economy, because that company's culture had just been laid bare in the most personal way imaginable. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The anger was gone, now replaced by a profound and heavy sense of responsibility. This was no longer about her humiliation. This was about her duty of care to her client. Due diligence wasn't just about balance sheets. It was about cultural compatibility, a merger between a company like Synth AI and a company that employed and empowered men like Bob Harrington wasn't a merger. It was an organ transplant that would be violently rejected. Her course of action became terrifyingly clear. She opened a secure connection to her firm's server and initiated a video call. In a small box on her screen, the face of David Chen appeared. He was the senior partner, a whip-smart lawyer in his 60s, with a calm demeanor that hid a ruthless legal mind. He was Kenna's mentor and her fiercest advocate. "Kenna," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. The connection was choppy. "It's 3 a.m. here. Is everything all right? Did something happen with the deal?" "Everything has happened with the deal," Kenna said, her voice low and steady. She quickly and dispassionately recounted the entire incident on the plane. She didn't frame it as a personal complaint. She framed it as a risk assessment, and the man who initiated this, David, is Robert Harrington, a VP at Omnicorp. David Chen was silent for a long moment. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Let me get this straight. The acquiring company's executive had you the lead counsel for the deal thrown out of your rightful seat based on what can only be described as blatant racial bias," correct, Kenna said. "And the airline's captain and crew were complicit. But that's the catalyst, not the core issue. The issue is what this reveals about Omnicorp, their culture. This isn't a one-off. I've done a preliminary deep dive. There's a pattern. This is who they are. We're about to let our client, Gideon Cole, hand over his life's work to a company with a fundamentally toxic culture. A culture that will chew up and spit out everything he has built. This merger will fail. Not on financial grounds, but on human ones. It's a bad deal, David. It's a catastrophic one." David listened, his expression grim. He knew Kenna. He knew she was not prone to exaggeration. He had seen her stare down belligerent CEOs and hostile attorneys without flinching. For her to be this resolute meant the situation was critical. "What are you recommending?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I am recommending we pull the plug," Kenna stated. "I believe we have a fiduciary duty to advise our client that new material information regarding the fitness of the acquiring partner has come to light. Information that fundamentally alters the viability of the post-merger integration. I am invoking the Material Adverse Change Clause, the MAC clause, the nuclear option in any M&A deal. It was a clause that allowed a party to back out if an event occurred that dramatically reduced the value of the company being acquired, or in some interpretations the partnership itself. Invoking it was rare and always explosive. "Their lawyers will fight it," David said, thinking through the angles. "They'll say a personnel issue with one VP doesn't constitute a material adverse change, and I will argue that a culture that allows such personnel to rise to the executive level and act with impunity is the very definition of a material adverse risk to a company like Synth AI, whose primary asset is its people and its collaborative culture. I will depose Harrington. I will depose the captain of this flight. I will subpoena Omnicorp's HR records based on the other lawsuits I've found. They think this is about a plane seat. I will make it about a pattern of systemic rot. They won't want that fight, David. They won't want that discovery process. We won't just win, we'll expose them." There was a long silence on the call. On the screen, Kenna could see the weight of the decision on her mentor's face. Billions of dollars, months of work, the firm's biggest fee of the year. Then David Chen smiled. It was a thin, predatory smile. The smile of a lawyer who smelled blood in the water. "You're right," he said. "It's your call, Kenna. You're on the ground. You have our full authority. Pull it, and document everything." "I already have," Kenna replied. The call ended. The validation was a balm on her raw nerves. She was not alone. She opened a new document. It was an official letter on Whittaker, Chen and Associates letterhead addressed to Desmond Shaw, CEO of Omnicorp, and to the board of Synth AI. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't writing with emotion. She was writing with the cold, brutal precision of a surgeon. She detailed the incident on Flight 101, naming Robert Harrington Captain Miller and flight attendant Brenda. She framed it not as a personal grievance, but as Exhibit A in a damning diagnosis of corporate culture. She cited the potential for a catastrophic culture clash post-merger, the risk to Synth AI's talent retention, and the fundamental incompatibility of their corporate values. She concluded, therefore pursuant to Section 8, 1C of the acquisition agreement regarding material adverse change, we must advise our client, Synth AI, to suspend the final signing. Effective immediately, Whitaker Chen and Associates is withdrawing its recommendation to proceed. We can no longer, in good faith, endorse this merger. We consider Omnicorp to have demonstrated a corporate culture that is fundamentally at odds with the principles and operational integrity of Synth AI, representing an unacceptable risk to our clients' assets, personnel, and future. All proceedings are hereby terminated. She attached a meticulously detailed timeline of the events on the plane and a summary of her preliminary research into Omnicorp's workplace environment. She CC'd David Chen, Gideon Cole, and the entire board of Synth AI. Her cursor hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. With one click, she would detonate a $4.8 billion deal. She would incinerate months of her own work. She would make an enemy of one of the most powerful tech conglomerates in the world. She thought of Harrington's sneering face. She thought of Brenda's smugness and the captain's indifference. And she thought of Gideon Cole trusting her to protect the company he loved. She clicked send. The email vanished into the ether, sent from 35,000 feet, a digital torpedo streaking toward its unsuspecting target. Kenna closed her laptop. She leaned her head back against the cheap, uncomfortable seat. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. The cabin around her was dark, most passengers asleep. The fate of Omnicorp Synth AI and dozens of careers had just been decided in seat 38E, and no one knew it but her. The plane continued its steady drone toward London, flying into the dawn of a day of reckoning. The descent into London was a masterpiece of controlled grace. Below the wings of transatlantic air flight 1011, the sprawling city emerged from a soft grey dawn. The Thames, a silver ribbon winding through a tapestry of history and commerce. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was one of quiet triumph. The gentle bumps as the plane passed through the cloud layer were mere punctuation marks in a journey that for the Omnicorp team was already a resounding success. Robert Bob Harrington stretched his legs, a contented sigh escaping his lips. He accepted a final cup of coffee from a flight attendant, not Brenda, who had discreetly vanished from the first-class rotation after the earlier unpleasantness, and leaned across the aisle toward his younger colleague Paul. "You see, Paul," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble of self-satisfaction. "That's how you handle things. You don't let standards slip. You assert yourself. Some people need to be reminded of the natural order of things." Paul, a junior executive whose ambition far outstripped his spine, nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, Bob. You handled it perfectly." She was clearly looking for a handout, some kind of free upgrade. He had watched the entire confrontation with Kenna, a silent, smirking co-conspirator. Harrington chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "Exactly. All that drama over a seat. Anyway, it's done. Now the real work begins. Shaw will be thrilled. This Synth AI integration is going to be my crowning achievement. The bonus alone will pay for the new boat." He was already picturing it, a sleek, white vessel named the Synergist, cruising along the coast of Connecticut. He felt invincible, a master of his universe, soaring high above a world that bent to his will. The plane touched down at Heathrow with barely a shudder. A smattering of polite applause rippled through the cabin. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, the familiar ding of the seatbelt sign going off was like a starting pistol. An instant chorus of clicks and beeps filled the air as phones were switched on, retethering the occupants to the world they sought to conquer. Harrington powered on his own device, a smug smile on his face, as he anticipated the logistics text from Desmond Shaw's assistant and the flood of congratulatory emails. The screen lit up and a cascade of notifications began to pour in, dozens of emails, texts, missed calls. It was more than he expected. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Tucked among the deluge was a string of frantic-looking messages from his wife, and most alarmingly, 5 missed calls from Desmond Shaw himself. His blood went cold. CIOs like Desmond Shaw did not call their vice presidents. They commanded, they delegated, they summoned. A direct call, let alone 5 of them, was not a communication. It was an alarm siren. Before he could even process the dread coiling in his stomach, his phone began to ring again. The name on the screen seemed to burn with a malevolent energy. Desmond Shaw. With a trembling finger, Harrington answered. "Bob," he said, forcing a casual tone that sounded brittle and false, even to his own ears. "We just touched down. Smooth flight. Ready to hit the ground running." The voice that answered was not the measured authoritative baritone of his CEO. It was a sound he had never heard before, a low, guttural snarl coiled with a white-hot fury that seemed to travel through the phone and physically jolt him. "What did you do?" The 3 words were spoken so quietly, yet with such immense pressure that they sucked the air out of Harrington's lungs. What do you mean? Desmond, is something wrong? A dry, mirthless laugh crackled down the line. "Oh, something's wrong, Bob. I'm sitting here in my hotel suite looking at an email that has just detonated a $4.8 billion deal. An email that has wiped out 2 years of work. An email from Whitaker Chen and Associates, from a Dr. Kenna Sterling. The name, Sterling." Harrington's mind frantically scrabbled for purchase. Where had he heard that name? The memory surfaced with the force of a physical blow, the calm, defiant voice of the woman in 2B correcting the captain. "It's Dr. Sterling. Desmond!" "Wait, Harrington!" stammered his face, losing all its color. Paul was staring at him now, his sycophantic smile frozen in place. "There was an issue on the flight. A passenger in the wrong area, she was being disruptive. I had the flight attendant move her. It was a simple seating issue." "A seating issue?" Shaw's voice erupted into a full-throated roar so loud that passengers several rows away flinched. "A seating issue. Dr. Kenna Sterling is the goddamn lead counsel from Whitaker Chen. She is the architect of the entire deal. She is the woman who personally untangled Synth AI's entire intellectual property portfolio. The woman whose signature is the only thing standing between us and owning the most advanced AI on the planet. You didn't have a passenger moved, you insufferable, arrogant fool. You had the single most critical person in this acquisition, publicly humiliated and forcibly removed." Harrington felt the world tilt, the plush cabin walls seeming to close in on him. He swayed on his feet, one hand gripping the seat back for support. Shaw wasn't finished. His voice dropped back to that terrifying, venomous hiss. "Her email cites, and I am quoting directly, an incident of gross professional misconduct and alarming cultural toxicity initiated by Omnicorp Vice President Robert Harrington. It terminates the deal under the Material Adverse Change Clause. It says our culture represents an unacceptable risk to her client." Gideon Cole has already replied. He stands with her. He calls your behavior disgusting, and an insight we are grateful to have received before it was too late. The deal is dead, Bob. You killed it. Stay right where you are. Don't you move a goddamn muscle. The line clicked dead. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. broken only by the hum of the cabin ventilation. Harrington stood, frozen, his florid face, now a waxy, chalk-white mask of horror. The phone slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered onto the carpeted floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness. Paul stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. He finally found his voice, a horrified whisper that carried through the cabin. The black woman. She was the lawyer the cabin doors had opened. Passengers were beginning to file out, but many lingered their curiosity from the earlier incident, now transformed into stunned comprehension. They looked from Harrington's shattered expression to Paul's aghast face, and they understood. The whispers began no longer subtle, but sharp, judgmental, and damning. He had not been the hero of the story, he had been the villain. And then, as if summoned by the drama, she appeared. Dr. Kenna Sterling emerged from behind the curtain, separating the cabins. She was the embodiment of composure. Her tailored blazer was crisp, her expression serene. She held her leather briefcase in one hand and her phone to her ear with the other, a small professional smile on her lips. She was not gloating. She was not triumphant. She was simply moving on. Her voice, clear and warm, cut through the tense atmosphere. Yes, Gideon, the statement is perfect, concise, professional, and firm. No, you absolutely did the right thing. Integrity is the most valuable asset we have, and you protected yours. Of course. I'll have a car take me straight to your office. We'll draft the public announcement together. No, don't worry about me. She paused, and her smile widened slightly. I feel fine. I feel vindicated. She walked down the aisle, her heels making a soft, steady rhythm on the floor. Her path took her directly past the frozen figure of Bob Harrington. She did not look at him. Her gaze did not flicker in his direction. It was not an act of ignoring him. It was something far more profound. In her world at that moment, he simply did not exist. He was a piece of static from a previous transmission, an obstacle that had been assessed, managed, and left behind. She stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, a figure of absolute power and grace, walking away from the smouldering wreckage she had refused to be consumed by. Harrington finally stumbled into motion, propelled by the stares of the other passengers. He followed the stream into the terminal, his mind a roaring vacuum of panic and denial. Each step felt like walking through wet concrete. As he emerged into the arrivals hall, a large man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit materialized at his side. The man's face was a granite slab of grim professionalism. It was Desmond Shaw's head of security. Mr. Harrington, the man said, his voice as flat and hard as his expression. Mr. Shaw is waiting for you. This way. It was not an invitation. It was a summons to his own execution. He was led not to a waiting limousine, but to a small, sterile, windowless room deep in the airport's VIP wing. The air inside was cold. Desmond Shaw was not pacing. He was standing perfectly still in the center of the room, his stillness more menacing than any overt display of rage. His face was pale, his eyes like chips of ice. The security man closed the door behind Harrington, leaving the two of them alone. "You sure," said his voice, barely a whisper. "You absolute, blithering, arrogant fool. Do you have any idea what you've done, Desmond? I swear I didn't know who she was." Harrington pleaded, his voice a pathetic, cracking whimper. "That is the entire point." Shaw exploded, his control finally shattering. He slammed his fist onto a small metal table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "It should not matter who she was. You saw a black woman in a place you decided she didn't belong, and your petty primordial bigotry took over. You couldn't help yourself. While I was finalizing the financial arrangements for our future, You were busy policing the seating chart like a hall monitor with a god complex. He advanced on Harrington, who shrank back against the wall. I spent 20 years building Omnicorp from nothing. 20 years of 16-hour days of battling regulators, of crushing competitors, of dragging this company into the future. And you incinerate it all in 10 minutes because you needed to feel like a big man on an airplane. I can apologize, Harrington whispered, tears welling in his eyes. I can fix it. We can make a statement. Shaw let out a laugh, a horrifying, joyless bark that was more terrifying than his yelling. Fix it. You want to fix it. You are a walking, talking symptom of the disease you just exposed to the entire world. You are the problem. You are fired, Bob. Effective immediately. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. Your keycard is now a useless piece of plastic. He stepped back, his voice becoming dangerously calm again. The man outside will escort you to a taxi. Not a company car. A taxi. You will pay for it with your own money. Your personal effects from the office will be shipped to you in a cardboard box. Now get out of my sight before I do something I will truly regret. Utterly broken, stripped of his power, his identity, and his future in the space of a single horrifying hour, Bob Harrington turned and stumbled out of the room. Desmond Shaw stood alone in the silence, the adrenaline of his rage draining away, leaving behind the cold, terrifying certainty of ruin. The deal wasn't just dead. It was dead in a way that was about to become a legend, a business school case study on the catastrophic cost of arrogance. And he knew with a sickness churning in his gut that the world would not see him as the victim. They would see him as the king of a corrupt and rotten empire brought down by one woman who refused to give up her seat. The fallout was not a storm. It was a seismic event with an epicenter located in seat 38E of a transatlantic flight. The shockwaves radiated outwards with astonishing speed, and what they struck they shattered. The email Kenna Sterling had sent from 35,000 feet was the initial tremor, but the ensuing cataclysm would methodically dismantle an empire and reshape the lives of everyone involved. The first 48 hours. The digital guillotine. In a cramped London newsroom, a young journalist at a scrappy tech blog named Digit All received an anonymous email. It was short, written by a passenger from Flight 101's first-class cabin who had witnessed the entire event and was left with a sour taste of injustice. The email detailed the confrontation, the condescension of a man he named as Robert Harrington of Omnicorp, and the calm dignity of the black lawyer who was unjustly removed. Crucially, the source attached a blurry photo of Harrington mid-gesticulation and a link to the just-released sterile corporate statement about the merger's collapse. The journalist's heart began to hammer. This wasn't just a business story about a failed deal. This was a human story, a drama of power prejudice and spectacular consequence. He worked through the night, verifying Harrington's position at Omnicorp and Kenna Sterling's role at Whitaker Chen. He connected the dots. By 9 a.m., the story was live. The headline was an explosive charge: racism at 35,000 feet. Sources allege Omnicorp VP's behavior scuttled 4.8 deal. The internet ignited. The story was voraciously shared first by the tech community, then by wider news outlets. It was picked up by the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, who framed it in stark financial terms. On the New York Stock Exchange, Omnicorp's ticker symbol, Omni, turned into a river of red. Traders weren't just reacting to the financial loss of the synth AI deal, they were reacting to the sudden, terrifying exposure of a diseased corporate culture. In a market where talent is the most valuable asset, Omnicorp had just hung a sign on its door that read, "Brilliance not welcome if it doesn't fit the mold." The stock didn't just dip, it hemorrhaged value. High-frequency trading algorithms programmed to sell on negative sentiment and keywords like scandal and investigation accelerated the freefall. By the closing bell, Omnicorp had lost over $10 billion in market capitalization, a staggering sum that made the $4.8 billion merger look like a pittance. Desmond Shaw, trapped in a Mayfair hotel suite, orchestrated a crisis PR meeting that was itself a catastrophe. Surrounded by panicked advisors, he couldn't grasp the true nature of the crisis. "This is about one idiot employee," he raged. "Fire him, issue a statement, and let's move on." His team tried to explain that the narrative had already spun out of his control. It wasn't about one man anymore. It was about the system that produced him. But Shaw, a man used to command and control, couldn't cede the narrative. He personally rewrote the press release, watering down the apology and insisting on the phrase, "an unfortunate and isolated incident." The release was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Social media commentators and industry analysts tore it apart. The term "isolated incident" became a meme juxtaposed with the Glassdoor reviews and past lawsuits that were now circulating widely. The hashtag "just not an isolated incident" began to trend. The story of Dr. Kenner Sterling, the lawyer who cancelled the merger, transformed from a news item into a cultural legend, a modern-day David and Goliath tale. The second week, the dominoes fall for the antagonists. The public humiliation was only the prelude to their private ruin. Bob Harrington. His corporate execution was swift, but his social demise was a slow, agonizing bleed. He retreated to his sprawling Connecticut home, but there was no escape. His face was on every news channel. He tried calling his closest friend, a fellow executive at another firm, only to be met with an eternally full voicemail box. He ventured out to a local tavern for a drink, hoping for anonymity, and saw his own disgraced face staring back at him from the bar's television. The other patrons fell silent, their stares a mixture of contempt and morbid curiosity. The bartender quietly asked him to leave. The ultimate humiliation came a week later. As he sat numbly in his study, the doorbell rang. It was a courier delivering a crisp envelope. Inside were divorce papers. His wife's petition cited irreparable damage to our social and financial standing. His status had been the bedrock of their marriage, and he had pulverized it. He was toxic, a pariah, and utterly alone. Brenda and Captain Miller, Transatlantic Air facing a potential boycott and a full-blown brand crisis, acted decisively. Their internal investigation was swift and brutal. Kenner's formal complaint was the primary document, but it was bolstered by sworn, unsolicited statements from 3 other first-class passengers. One, a retired judge, gave a damning minute-by-minute account of Brenda's escalating hostility and Captain Miller's willful negligence. Brenda was called into a hearing at the airline's headquarters. Faced with multiple corroborating eyewitness accounts, her facade of professionalism crumbled. Her defense that she was just following procedure was dismantled when investigators showed that procedure required her to personally verify both boarding passes against her manifest, which she had failed to do. She was fired for gross misconduct, and her FAA license was flagged, effectively blacklisting her from every major airline. Captain Miller, a man with 30 years of seniority, was spared termination, but not disgrace. He was grounded, suspended for 6 months without pay, and his path to a lucrative senior management position was permanently blocked. His superiors made it clear that his failure was not one of procedure, but of character, a fatal flaw in a captain. The respect he once commanded from his crews was gone forever, replaced by the whispered story of the pilot who chose prejudice over his duty. The long term, the rot spreads. Desmond Shaw believed he could weather the storm. He had survived market downturns, hostile takeover bids, and boardroom coups. He underestimated, however, that the scandal hadn't just damaged his company's reputation. It had emboldened his company's ghosts. Deep within Omnicorp's labyrinthine accounting department, a mild-mannered senior controller named Frank had watched the company's ethical compass spin out of control for years. He had witnessed Shaw's aggressive, legally dubious accounting strategies firsthand, but had been too afraid to speak up. The story of Kenna Sterling gave him courage. He saw a person who had risked everything for a principle, and it shamed his own silence. He anonymously contacted the Forbes journalist who had been dogging the company since the scandal broke. The journalist, armed with Frank's insider information, spent the next 6 months piecing together a mosaic of corporate deceit. The story he published was a bombshell. It detailed how Shaw, facing slowing growth in Omnicorp's core business, had systematically inflated the value of company assets and deferred liabilities to create the illusion of robust health. The Synth AI acquisition wasn't just a strategic move, it was a desperate attempt to inject real explosive growth into a company that was secretly starting to rot from the inside. The Forbes expose triggered the inevitable. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which had been passively monitoring the situation, now had a roadmap. They launched a formal investigation. One Tuesday morning, SEC agents armed with a federal warrant walked into Omnicorp's gleaming Manhattan headquarters. They weren't aggressive, but their calm, methodical presence was terrifying. They boxed up servers' financial records and executive hard drives. The image of agents carrying file boxes out of Omnicorp Tower became the definitive photograph of the company's fall. The investigation confirmed everything and uncovered more. Desmond Shaw was charged with multiple counts of securities fraud conspiracy and making false statements to investors. His board, desperate to save themselves, forced his resignation. His multi-million-dollar severance package was frozen pending the outcome of the trial. His life became a blur of depositions and strategy meetings with lawyers who billed $1,000 an hour. The powerful CEO was reduced to a defendant, his fate in the hands of others. Omnicorp, leaderless and mortally wounded, was carved up and sold for parts, its name becoming a byword for hubris and disgrace. The Triumph, a foundation of integrity, and Dr. Kenna Sterling. Her life was also transformed, but in the opposite direction. She became a legal icon. Whitaker Chen & Associates was deluged with calls from Fortune 500 companies. They didn't just want a brilliant lawyer, they wanted the firm that had fostered and then backed Kenna Sterling. They wanted that integrity attached to their own brand. In a partners' meeting 6 months after the incident, David Chen didn't just nominate Kenna for partnership, he declared it a necessity for the firm's future. She was made a full partner, the youngest in its century-long history. Gideon Cole and Synth AI, having dodged a corporate bullet, found themselves in an even stronger position. A rival, more stable tech giant with a renowned culture of respect approached them. They wanted Synth AI's technology, but they also wanted its principled leadership. With Kenna again at the helm of the negotiations, a new deal was struck this time. For $6 billion as a non-negotiable condition, Gideon insisted that Kenna Sterling be given a seat on the new parent company's board of directors to serve as an ethical overseer. Kenna accepted, but her vision extended beyond boardrooms. With a significant portion of her earnings from the deal, she established the Sterling Foundation for Equity in Law, a non-profit dedicated to providing scholarships, mentorship, and career placement for minority students pursuing corporate law. She wanted to build a ladder for others, so they wouldn't have to fight so hard for a place at the table she had so powerfully commanded. A year later, she was flying to her first board meeting in London. She was in seat 2B. As the flight reached cruising altitude, a young black flight attendant approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me, Dr. Sterling," she asked, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "I hope this isn't unprofessional, but I have to say something. I'm new with this airline. They use your story in our training now. The Flight 101 story. They use it to teach us about what's right, about listening and respect. I wanted to thank you. You changed things for a lot of people." Kenna looked up from her documents, a warm, genuine smile spreading across her face. The ghosts of that humiliating flight were long gone. In their place was a legacy. Her victory wasn't just personal, it was institutional. She hadn't just won a battle, she had redrawn the map. "Thank you," Kenna said, her voice full of grace. "That means more than you know." So what's the real takeaway from the story of Dr. Kenna Sterling? It's a stark reminder that karma isn't just some mystical force. It's the logical consequence of our actions delivered with brutal efficiency. For Bob Harrington and Desmond Shaw, a single act of prejudice wasn't a small mistake. It was the tiny crack that shattered their entire world. For Kenna, a moment of profound humiliation became the catalyst for her greatest triumph. This story shows that in our interconnected world, character is capital, and integrity is the ultimate power. True strength isn't about the seat you occupy, but the principles you stand for. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that integrity should always have the last word, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories where karma delivers the final, undeniable verdict. Let us know in the comments what you think about Kenna's decision.